Thank you. I got to press a button to talk. Okay. Place I'd like to start today, kind of our two very critical people to this process are Timothy, who's on his way, and Stacy Trumbo. And I asked Stacy to introduce himself to this committee.
Good afternoon. I'm Stacy Trumbo. I'm the Oklahoma County Engineer. I've been here since late 2007, and the Department of Justice came in early 2008. So I've been here since day one on this process and have not really enjoyed it. But with you all, we're going to get this thing solved. I have all the confidence, and I look forward to working with all of you. So I'll leave you with my contact information before today is over. So if you want to communicate, we can do that.
Great, thank you. And Timothy, would you introduce yourself to our committee since you're kind of critical to this? Please.
Timothy Tardibono with the Oklahoma County Criminal Justice Advisory Council, and doing whatever Stacy needs done to help him and get everything ready for you all to move forward.
Thank you. Commissioner Mon, would you like to say anything? Thanks for being here.
I just wanted to say, as chairman of Oklahoma County, I appreciate you very much for willing to serve. This is the most important thing. We were cited today to announce the RFP that will go out to start the process to acquire the land. And we are indeed calling this a historic day. So I appreciate every one of you's willingness to attend and to also be willing to serve for what will probably be a lengthy commitment. But we appreciate your integrity that you made yourselves obvious choices, as the chairman just mentioned. We also have our public information officer here who would like to get a photo of you since this is a historic day and your first meeting, if you would so indulge.
And then Commissioner, after the photo, is there anybody else in county government you would like to introduce?
We have Brandy Garner here, who is the current jail administrator, and I'm sure her input throughout this process will be very valuable. She's just going to be officially on the job January 20th, but she's been transitioning now for a few weeks. And Aaron Moore is also with the engineering office. The District 3 Chief Deputy Don Cash is here. Second Deputy Chelsea Barnett for District 3. Sarah Dory is the Public Information Officer for my office. And then Jessica Clayton is our brand new Chief Deputy for District 2. And certainly we all stand at your pleasure to serve any way we can to be helpful as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. You want to take a photo?
Usually we do it right here in front of the horseshoe, if you wouldn't mind taking a second. And obviously Carrie Hudson, the acting county clerk, is here also. Mr. Chairman, we also have the engineers for the jail. Dale and Mandy are here also. When they're on the horseshoe, you can wave at them.
Public participation is important to this committee, and the county might have a different process than I'm used to. Is there anybody from the public that would like the participation process explained? Okay, we all know it. I think our first item is a presentation. Tim, do you want to introduce it? Or is Stacy?
I can do it. So going back to 2021, the Criminal Justice Advisory Council has the issue of whether there should be a new jail, and if so, how would that be done? The Criminal Justice Advisory Council took it upon themselves. We put out an RFP. It was publicly open. We had several interested parties from across the country, several in Tulsa. We narrowed it down to two, and then eventually the folks at FSB and HOK. At that time, Mr. Sempner was at FSB. He's now with Tradesman Group. They put this together. November 2021 is when it came to CJAC. It then went before the trust for approval, then went to the Board of County Commissioners, and the Budget Board saw it as well. And that was the genesis for the concept of going to the voter and putting this proposal together to the voter that then passed in June 28, 2022. So this presentations, we've adjusted it a little bit, tried to modify it, but this is essentially the study they did looking at, and what we tasked them with doing is, do we renovate the current jail was one option. Do we do some sort of annex to support the current building? That was another option. And both of those options had continued to be discussed in the community with county officials, and there was never a clear determination, are either of those options good options? And then finally was the new jail. And the new jail had been proposed for going back into the 2000s, anywhere from 3,000 to 2,500 beds, which then drives your price point way up. And so as they'll present, several things have been happening that allow us to put this proposal, this size proposal, with the funding proposal together. And that was the other thing we said. If you are going to do any of these three things, what is this cost going to be and what is the timeline? And so they'll go through all of those things. And so who's starting? Jeff Bradley from HOK.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having us here. It's kind of interesting to hear Stacy talk about the dates earlier. I think my first meeting here was back in 2009. It's my first meeting on the jail. It's quite interesting. HOK actually did a master plan back then in 2009. And then intermittently through time, we're back here again. Pleased and excited and honored to do so. The group that we have here today, we have myself. I'm the National Director of HOK's Justice Program and Civic Building Program. And we have 6 different justice design centers throughout the country. We're a large firm, over 1,800 people, and different divisions. They do stadiums, hospitals, towers, a little bit of every justice, airports. And with that, we also have the ability to share resources from the different offices if and when we need to, which is also very valuable because there's a lot that you learn from across the country on how people do things, because everyone does something different. There's no 2 jails that are alike anywhere, and I can testify that. I've been doing it for about 30 years. So myself, we have here today, and Kurt Pardee. Kurt and I worked together for about 20 years. We talk daily. We talk an awful lot about Oklahoma County. And Kurt, do you want to talk briefly about yourself? Go ahead.
Sure. Kurt Pardee. I'm Director of Architecture for HOK and located in Dallas, so just a stone's throw away. Have been working on justice projects, large justice projects, much like your own, for the last 25 years. So I have a lot of experience in working with county detention centers, county courthouse facilities, the whole process. And I think that's the important part here, is having experience all the way from intake and all the way through, incarceration, and then when they're released, what happens to people. So helping people really be able to do the whole, get them through the process and back out into the community. Thank you.
John?
I'm John Sempner. I led the local team. I've been doing large-scale civic projects since around 1999 was my first one. So I'll let Jeff continue to talk about this.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and Kurt talked about process. One of the important things in the process, we aren't just a design firm. We are considered justice consultants as well. We do everything from master planning to data analysis to staffing planning, staffing ratios, and all the other things that would go into a facility like this. The only thing we typically do not do in a project is the civil engineering. We always depend on the locals for that. They know a lot more about it, and it just works really well having all the locals do that. This is the team that we put together, the main players on this team. There's a lot of other people behind the scenes that touched it. About 40 different people touched it through this process. You see John up there. Jeff Goodell, he's the co-director of justice. He's out of Chicago. He's also our mental health expert for the company that leads most of those projects. Leslie Batchelor, she's local. She's a public finance attorney. She was very helpful and instrumental in going through a lot of the finance process that's in the report. Wayne Snow, community liaison. It's a very controversial issue, and we don't claim to know it all, and we thought it was best to have some good local resources here to help communicate and talk to the people and find out what's important and what we need to cover and such. And also Kurt is up there as well. And then Dan Ashkenazi, he's a municipal bond specialist. Their firm has actually financed over 50 jails and prison projects around the country. So there were some added resources, and Dan and Leslie actually spent an awful lot of time together to go through the numbers and get to where we're at. So this was the process, and this is pretty comprehensive. The first thing was just to learn and educate ourselves, because there's so many different people that are involved in this. There's some things that Oklahoma County, I think, that has done extremely well. There's a lot, of course, needs with the jail. I'll address some of those other issues in a few minutes here, but you've got a lot of concerned people. Your community leaders had to be engaged. We had multiple public meetings. Direction from CJAC, we were constantly working with Tim and reporting things back. Then we had discussions, follow-up discussions. Once we listened to everybody, we went back and talked amongst ourselves and came up with different ideas and discussion points to try and get further direction as far as where they wanted to see things go. We came up with different design options that Kurt's going to go over and talk with you about in a few moments. We made our recommendations, and in those recommendations, we didn't do any of this in a closed bubble. I mean, this was all very open and an awful lot of feedback. Y'all do have a lot of committees, but in the long run, when it comes to the end of the day, when the community wants to know something, it's actually pretty good. Because sometimes we'll work with one committee in a major metropolitan area, and then all the other people feel left out. So the more transparent that you are, and like you all have been here, the more successful usually projects like this go. So I really compliment you for that. We had our final presentation in November, and then we brought it back to y'all for you guys to make the decision as far as where you wanted to go and what you wanted to do. The report has been reviewed and shown to us, the jail trust, the county commissioners, and it was your choice to take action and go ahead and get a bond measure passed to support this and moving forward. And so what we heard back and what we did here, this direction came, and the recommendations are both from the jail trust and CJAC, both. And to build a better detention center to ACA standards on a new site. We looked at the financing, and Kurt and John will address that in a few moments. You'll get a better understanding on that in a little more detail. The funding would be to include a vote to extend the existing bonds. The facility would utilize no more than 950 housing units, which is approximately 1,800 individuals that could be addressed with this particular project. Always room for expansion. There isn't a facility that we don't do that we don't accommodate and look for expansion in the future when we're all not here. That's a very important thing. Community shall continue its criminal justice work to ensure its 15% vacancy rate. You guys have done an excellent job in bringing your numbers down back from the day when they creeped up to 2,500 and where you're at right now. There's something else I want to mention here that this county has done and the city has done. Some of your community mental health programs, there's a lot of other very large progressive cities and counties across the country that don't have all the facilities that you have here that you've done. And from the Women's Center and some of the other facilities. And so I applaud you for that. And I also bring that up because some of the mental health needs that derive from projects like this that could be, whether it's diversion facility, treatment facility, or whatever, you may not have to do something as big as somebody else may have had to do, because you already have it, some of it in place. And so that's a topic to discuss on where you want to go with things on the numbers, especially for your especially mental health unit. And then also utilize a site selection and construction oversight task force. And that's real important. Instead of just saying this is where it goes, Kurt will talk to you about the analysis of what we did to talk about sites and such. And so now we'll go ahead and talk about the team approach, and Kurt will address that with you.
So that was the recommendations that all three groups, CJAC, the Jail Trust, and the county commissioners all unanimously approved. And that really led to the bond issue being passed. You know, our team really came down to this simple page when we talked about recommendations. Build a better Oklahoma County Detention Center. You know, where does that start? Focus on diversion at intake. When somebody shows up at the jail, they need to have options more than just going into the jail. And we need to have the resources there. And so really at intake is a really important part of the design of moving forward. Meeting ACA standards, you know, we want to hammer that. The current jail is far from that. Also, you know, we brought forth not only what to build, but how to pay for it. So we recommended using ARPA funds, GULP bonds, and existing revenue. Those three things are how we were going to pay for this facility. But you can't stop there. We are still going to have issues with the current facility as we go to build a new facility. And so we recommended to take the Detention Center Action Committee's recommendations and provide some improvements on a temporary basis. So to talk a little bit about the population, you know, what are we building for? You know, if you look back to 2004, we peaked out at around 2,600 individuals in that facility. That facility was designed for 1,200 individuals. We had 2,600 people in it. So we have brought that number down. And if you look on any given day, we're in the 1,500 to 1,600 range. Going back to a recommendation that was passed earlier, you want a 15% buffer just so that you have spare beds, and as you rotate people in and out, you have some rooms for sanitization, for cleaning, for maintenance, for all of those things. So even though you have an active number of people in the facility, you need additional beds beyond that. So as we kind of banded how the average ADA had looked throughout 2020 and 2021, we recognized that it sat there and fluctuated in the 1,600 to 1,800 range, and that was really our recommended band of where to build a facility. When we looked at the cost to do that, we took the number that we were using to design facilities at the time, you know, a very economical $450 a square foot. For those of you in construction knows that was a good number in 2021. We have seen significant inflation since then. In addition to that, we did 20% for soft cost on a project of this scale. We felt that was an acceptable range. But you can sit there and look at the different jail sizes and see how the costs kind of drove out and why we ended at 1,800. That was kind of a big community census was to get to there. We also wanted to point out that there was a lot of different organizations around the state and the city doing things that would chew into our required number. We identified about 250 beds. We really felt that those beds were slightly different than the needs at the jail. And while they will be a long-term reduction in jail needs, they're not necessarily a short-term reduction in jail needs. So I will let Kurt talk about the proposed solution.
Thank you, John. So the beginning of a master planning process, and really what we set out to do, is really to help establish direction for a project like this. You know, when we get started on a large undertaking like this, obviously it's important to get public feedback and feedback from all the people that are going to be using this facility, people that see changes are needed, and then also looking at understanding how are facilities like this being built today, and how are they taking in inmates, and how are they diverting inmates, and what are the processes that are different than they were when this building that you have was built. So, I mean, that was kind of the beginning of how we set out to work with you here at the county. Um, some of the things that I think are going to make this project successful for you are obviously building a better, newer process for your intake and booking center. A new building like this for you will incorporate diversion, trying to send people out to other types of facilities, looking at that process early instead of having folks get caught in the jail process. So that early investment in giving people an option so they don't end up in your jail facility really helps you control the amount of beds that you need to build. So that's a really important piece of what we need to do to move forward with this project. Looking at diversion, there are a lot of different ways. HOK has done a number of facilities with counties across the country, and we'd love to help you, look at some videos of how those facilities were designed and built. But really helping counties develop those facilities so that they have a different place to take arrestees instead of bringing them directly to the jail. It's really important. That first step is so important to help reduce the number of inmates that are going to be in your facility. So diversion and intake, those are really two important pieces of the solution for this project. Direct supervision design. Your existing facility is an antiquated indirect supervision. So we have been designing direct supervision facilities for over 25 years now across the country. And this puts an officer in the housing unit understanding what's going on with the inmates in the facility so that he can or she can hear things and know what's going on. It reduces vandalism in the jail. We actually have done facilities where we are able to slightly reduce the amount of security in the facility from a hardened standpoint. That helps reduce cost. So, that direct supervision component is the next big step that will help you to move forward into a facility that will be, better be able to be managed and last a long time. Having appropriate education and program support space. Your facility doesn't have most of that. So having readily available rooms, multi-purpose rooms, educational facilities for inmates that are there for a while so that they actually have an opportunity to learn something, maybe advance, their knowledge of what they can do on the outside, give them a better idea of how to move forward with their life. These are all important things and important components of a new modern jail facility. So that's going to be really important. Having some courtrooms on site, it can be very valuable. It reduces transport of inmates. So instead of bringing everyone to this location, to the downtown here, keeping some people at a jail facility where you might have some courtrooms where judges would actually go so that you don't have to put them into vans and bring them all here. It reduces transport cost, which reduces cost, right? So that's really important for operations moving forward if you can do that to help reduce your overall cost. Intervention and reintegration. No one's going to be in your jail forever. So, having a process and having connections to outside entities that provide services to your county and setting up a process for someone that's being released so that they can figure out where to go and how to get there, really important. That just means that there will be less recidivism, less of those people coming back to your facility. So, that whole process is really important, and that's an important piece of it. We know, and I know you all have heard, there are over 60% of the inmates in your facility are going to have some kind of medical or mental health problem. So having appropriate facilities in your building where you can care for them so that you don't have to take them to a local hospital unless they really need, really need emergency treatment. But the more you can do at this facility, it reduces your operational cost. It keeps those costs lower. It means less transport officers. It keeps the community safer. So having those types of facilities in-house will really help you. Jeff and I were part of a project in Dallas County where we built a 300-bed medical and mental health facility, and they saw a huge, enormous benefit from doing that. It just really reduced the amount of people they needed to take from their facility to the local county hospital, which was great for them. And finally, a facility that is appropriately designed today to meet today's building codes is going to help prevent the spread of diseases, whether it's COVID, whether it's tuberculosis. It's going to give you facilities to be able to care for people so that they don't get those kinds of diseases while they're in your facilities. So that's really important as well.
Let's take a break here. Are there any questions so far from the board? We're covering a lot of ground.
Oh, in Bush. All right. I did want to clarify one thing just in regards to the size and population that was being mentioned. So it sounded like the range was in the 1800s or so, and I did want to just kind of understand what the conclusion was or how you kind of got there, because it sounded like we were also saying that some of the alternative beds, that 200 and some odd number with MAPS facilities and some other things, weren't necessarily being considered. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying as far as how many, like what we need to plan for, this 15% buffer, and then how other facilities or other opportunities might be coming online along the same timeline might factor in or shouldn't factor into what we're considering.
That's a great question. I think we have a slide just a bit further on that we can kind of show you the breakout that we see, and that will help explain that a little bit. That's a wonderful question. Anything else? Okay. So next are just a couple of photographs that show things, the way we are doing different types of facilities for counties, for detention facilities across the country. Mental health treatment, one thing that's really important for those that need mental health treatment is to have access to natural daylight. So giving them, a facility that can do that, and it doesn't need to be skylights. It can be something simple. Having a day space where they can get out of their enclosed cell area to see daylight. The studies have shown it makes a big impact on those individuals. So having a little bit of that in your facility will be helpful for that. Also, you'll notice in these slides we're going to look at normative environment as much as possible. This is actually a hardened facility. However, you can see there are some colors that have been integrated. Some of the higher security doors are actually wood. They're solid core wood doors. They cost a little bit less. These areas have a direct supervision component, so you don't need that high level security door frame. So it saves you a little bit of money, in the front end as well. But it also makes it look a little more normative for the folks that are in there. Having some soft surfaces helps to reduce reverberation. So, having that reduces stress for the individuals that are located in these buildings. Another more minimum security environment, a day space outside of some cells. All facilities, and you would know this better than anyone here, have classification of inmates. So you have your maximum security inmates, you have medium and minimum and so forth. So you don't put everyone in this kind of environment, but you do have options, and a newer facility that can provide those options helps the jail operations folks be able to manage the facility better and have a better outcome for the people that are in there. A little more medium security environment. Again, there's a lot of daylight coming in. There's a different type of seating. There are some things for people to do. And the officer is in that podium in the corner there, watching people throughout the day. So he or she has a good a good focus on who's doing what and how things are going on in the housing unit. So it reduces all those issues that have been in the papers. Maximum security spaces as well, where you do have some individuals that need to be kept on their own, not necessarily with the rest of the population. So we design those into these areas as well. In terms of the breakout, so this, sir, is a little bit of that breakout we're looking at. So you can see about 1,400 of those inmates in this facility, of this proposed facility, would be general population and also just general reception and intake, short term. And then we had about 400 individuals for medical and mental health. So that medical mental health component could be different, you know, and I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the next slides. So this is one of the very basic concepts that we developed. Of course, and I think Jeff touched on it, it's really important to figure out where this is going to go. You know, you have to have a site. In order to have a site, you kind of need to know how much space you're going to need so you know what to purchase. So we start with some general concepts after we know basically what the size of the project will be, so that we understand, you know, how much space do we need for the building, how much space do we need for parking and public access and all those kinds of things. Well, this kind of a diagram is very helpful for us as we start to look at that. We also, after talking with so many of the people and committees through our through the CJAC master planning process, we learned, you know, the important things. You know, most people wanted it to be within 10 minutes of downtown if possible, feeling that, again, reduces inmate transport, but also makes everyone that works with the jail system, meaning courts and so forth, closer, you know, to the folks that are in the jail. So there's a lot of benefit for having it within that 10-mile radius. Also, it helps us to understand how the site needs to be developed. Does it have the right utilities? Does it have good site access? Does it have space for growth? These are all important things as we move forward. Location-wise, this is just a diagram that John's group did that really shows, I think, you know, a greenfield site. If we were to look at a greenfield site, you know, this shows us those properties, or really the outline of what it takes to find a property within that area, and so there's a lot of opportunity, you know, in the Oklahoma City area here for us to put this new facility. And so now that, you know, I should also add some of the other ideas that we came up with. We came up with some two-story options, you know, to reduce the amount of the site. If you notice, that first site was about 45 acres. You know, this one would be about 22 acres. You know, it was a two-story solution that we did for the committee. That's that one-level version. We also looked at, you know, is there a way to build on the existing jail sites? So we looked at different options there. Really, all those options where you get to the size you need to be require purchasing some of the adjacent property to look at different options. And there are all kinds of things that go into that equation, you know, multiple story jail facilities. And I think the people working in yours today would say elevators are so difficult to work with when you're taking inmates up and down, and you have, in your case, you have the healthcare on the top floor, which is the absolutely worst place for it to be, because those folks need to be down on level 1 where they can get easier access to healthcare, and so the people working there can get there easier. So there's a lot of things that go into that, but having a low-rise facility, you know, is the way a lot of communities like to go. But we did look at a couple of different options for how to put the facility on that site. And then there's just another greenfield site option. There's so many options when you're at this phase. So I think it helps to understand what the parameters are, and then you can kind of go from there. Thank you.
I have a question. Kurtz, in your experience, what is the most recommended solution? 1-story, 2-story? If space was not an issue.
If space were not an issue, I think that 2-story. So a facility that's big. This is a big facility, right? So what we see is if it's all one level, The one thing you can hear sometimes from the people that are operating it is it's football fields long, multiple football fields long. So that's a lot of walking for the people that work there. And, it just takes a lot of space and a lot of walking. If you take that and cut it in half by going to 2 levels, that significantly reduces the walking. You do add the elevator component, but if it's just for 2 levels, people aren't on those elevators very long. There's always stairs as an option. So, there's benefits to that. So that's kind of my thought on that. Not that, there's anything wrong with the 1-story option either. From a cost standpoint, you being a contractor in your history, there's a lot of pluses and minuses behind that. So it's hard to say where we'd be there. Oh, and most housing units that we do a main floor with a mezzanine, and that's 1 floor when we look at it. As we get further into the planning process, that would be helpful for you to know as we look into that. So.
Just,
Yes, sir.
sorry, just to, I guess as a little follow-up to what Javier's saying, just as you mentioned that, so when we talk about stories, I mean, so you have, your clear heights are gonna be quite a bit taller on each story, though, than what might be typical in commercial spaces or
Oh,
commercial
absolutely.
applications because of the mezzanine. So you're kind of planning for two stories, if you will, worth of space for activity height-wise.
Yes,
When you start talking about if it's a 2-story building versus 1-story.
we're probably looking at 18 to 20 feet floor to floor.
Right.
Yeah, and then that first floor would have a mezzanine. Yeah, and the
Yeah.
second floor. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Before we continue, Commissioner Davidson, we're glad you're here. Do you have any thoughts or advice for us? We're here to learn too. Thank you.
I'll try to keep it quick. So this was just a little bit of an explanation on when we looked at renovating the existing facility versus when we looked at building new. So when you really look into it, you can renovate that existing facility and build onto it, but you can't fix its design. And because of that, the operation of that facility versus the operation of a new facility is extremely more expensive. So that's really what drove us to a new facility, wholeheartedly, was operationally more than first cost. When we talk about, this great facility, it goes back to how do we fund it? And we knew that ARPA funding was going to be a key component of how to fund it. And so the ARPA board here at the county has recently authorized $40 million for a mental health and healthcare facility that will service the county jail. And as you look at it, it is absolutely necessary due to the infrastructure that is present today. Really limits the ability to provide health care. So these were our funding recommendations of how to fund it. The top 2 you can see have now been materialized. ARPA funds have been approved at $40 million. The bond fund has been passed at $260 million, totaling the target of $300 million. We've all talked about that $300 million was, quite a bit old. And so we did provide 2 other recommendations on how to pay for any overages. And that really, bottom line, comes down to it's coming out of the existing revenue stream of the county. So when we talked about a schedule, and this schedule was a little out of date, really, we recognized that if you're going to use ARPA funding, that's really the only hard stick. Of course, we all want a better jail and we all want it faster, but the ARPA funding has to be utilized by 2026. And so the schedule presented here had about a year buffer. We're probably about 6 months behind this schedule already. And so we really recommend some speed to get to the final solution. Yep.
So to Sandino's point, each of those things happening with maps isn't going to be a direct one-on-one taking someone out of the jail. What we anticipate is as those services become more available, it's going to mean less people coming into the jail because they're diverted. What we didn't know at the time was that Griffin is going to be moving from Norman to OSU OKC's site right here at Reno and Portland, which we think will further enhance and which allowed us to scale the medical. If you looked at the bed, that 400 bed medical mental health unit, we think we can do that now at about 175 or 200 because all these other resources have now come online and will come online. So by the time we go into the new facility, most of these pieces will be up and running. And so we think the jail population is going to continue to go down as those things expand. And then on the flip side, on the back end, as the new district attorney gets involved, she's already expressed support for expanding things like drug court, community sentencing, things of that nature. Will have more opportunity to control that size even more.
Thanks for that.
And that was it. So with that, we would answer any other questions. Yes, sir.
Let me just add one more thing. Today's jail population was 1478, but about 150 of that, if you go back to that slide where we had the thing, the chart, 150 of that is Department of Corrections, and that's been an ongoing number that's driven up our jail population higher than it would be. But with the population that we have today, if we were walking into the new facility, even with the Department of Corrections folks that are waiting to be transferred, they've been sentenced, they've not been transferred, we would be under that 1,500 number that we need. And so that's another thing that's not on you all, but as the commissioners and others work with the state on pre-pandemic, that number was 75 to 100, and even another 50 or 55 would really provide more relief. So that's one of the things that on our state discussions we're pushing on, and I'm sure Major Gardner would appreciate having only 75 to 100 DOC residents instead of 150. It's been as high as 200 just a month ago. So it is something that's an ongoing problem that we need to work on.
So my understanding is that you're planning an 1,800 facility with a 15% empty
Right.
number of units. That roughly brings you back to 1,500, right? 270 of those are going to be empty. What is the breakdown for minimum, maximum, and security levels?
Yeah, as we walked through that with the acting jail trust at the time, we did break those down, and we have a number. I don't know them off the top of my head. I can get them for you, but I would want to work with the current jail to really define that, because the how they classify individuals is still, I think, under a topic that will likely be addressed as we're going through this.
So today's breakout is 13% minimum, 35% medium, and 52% maximum. And those numbers have been going, the minimum has been going down and maximum has been going up. But I think at some point, if Major Garner wants to address it, I think they are looking at how would they redo their classification system, because they've inherited it from the sheriff. And even then, I don't think the sheriff's office prior to the current sheriff was overly thrilled with that system, but that's the national system that's in place. There's some discussions of should we go through the effort to validate a study on our own individuals on how to do a new classification system. I don't know if you want to say something about that or not, but we don't, it's still preliminary, but I think everyone would like a better way to classify things. I think that's accurate.
Thank you.
Other questions from the board? So, Ms. Gardner, we keep talking about you. Do you want to add anything or ask any questions of this team?
Not really. I'm just here to kind of get a feel for how things are going to go moving forward. I hope that you do seek input from us and make sure that we're included in this process because we're in there doing the job. I have experience at other facilities, and a lot of my staff has experience at other facilities, so we know that we could do better with a different facility, and we know kind of what works and what doesn't. So
Thank you. Would any of this board like a tour of the jail? Are we all good?
I've seen it, and
Pardon me?
I've seen it and very familiar with it, and you guys are doing great things considering the original design did not plan for medical or mental or any sort of additional services, so thank you for your service.
thank you.
Yes, Joanne? Okay, can you?
Yes.
I think, Timothy, let's offer it to everybody, and we already have one taker. I'll go too. So you got two. Three. Only take three at a time. So that'd be great if you'd set that up, please. Good idea. Yes, ma'am. Other comments from the board? Cassie, do we have any written requests for comment from the public? Is there anybody from the public who wants to comment that didn't fill out the form? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate that. One of the things I did want to bring up for you, keep in the back of your mind, for the ARPA-funded facility, we've got a time crunch you're looking at there. But what we've dealt with cost escalations throughout the country, or especially over the past just 12 months, even if you took where you're at today, cost escalation, and figured out just 6% on a $300 million project, 6% over a year's time, $18 million. Any other extra little studies you do, add to that time. So if you added 6 months for studies, now you're talking extra $9 million. You're cutting into your capital project. 3 months, you're $4.5 million. So it's very real today that time is money, and so that's I just wanted you to don't forget that when you have your conversations on how to move forward. Thank you.
Good point, thank you. Is there any other comments, thoughts on this agenda item, team? Okay, if not, we'll go to agenda item 2, which is discussion of possible action to select 1 to 3 members of the advisory board to serve with the county engineer on RFQ review committee for new jail designer architect. Stacy, do you want to explain this?
Yes.
Thanks.
Since you are all seated, there's been kind of a game changer, and that was bringing the ARPA money into the project. $40 million, it's at least 20% of the project. Where I didn't feel like we were on really a timeline before, we were just using the bond monies. Now you've got to have your design completely done by December 2024 and your construction money encumbered. And then you have to build that facility by December 2026, which means we've got to get started on the design, and we've got to find some land and some other things that we'll be going through earlier. So that was a huge kind of a game changer for a timeline. And what we basically do, is a government process, we'll solicit requests for qualifications from the various architectural teams that are out there that are interested, and they'll send them in to us. And then we'll have a committee that would review those and shortlist those, meaning we'll narrow it down to 3, 4, 5, however many you want to interview. We'll bring them in for interviews, and we'll select the most qualified firm that you feel the most comfortable with to design this for you. Certainly the behavioral part that's art-bound will have to be designed fairly quickly, and then the jail, coming behind that, or maybe all at once, depending on how fast they can go. But we've got to get started on that process because we are under a pretty good deadline. Myself, Chantel Boso, who you will meet, our purchasing director right here, will be on that committee. We could include, and this is up to you, someone from the jail staff, someone from the facility staff to be on there. And then there can be no more than 3 of you because of the quorum problem. So 1 to 3 of you. We need a healthy committee, but not too big, or it kind of tends to not work very well.
Thank you, Stacy. Any questions for Stacy?
Yeah, I wanted to just make sure I was clarifying. So it sounds like you're saying, so we got a time crunch, like, yeah, no pressure, but don't take too much time because it equates to millions of dollars every month. And then, but it also sounds like what we're saying is that the mental health facility and the ARPA dollars are critical paths, but don't necessarily dictate all of the design for the space. I mean, so the mental health component and the overall jail component need to be in the same location. So location becomes critical path. But then there is a scenario where we may fast track or the design of the mental health space, understanding that it needs to complement the broader jail. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding that.
I think you're right. There is a path that way. You can do it all at once, or you can separate those two components, but both of them being co-located, that does put the selection of the land on the critical path, hands down.
Other questions for Stacy? So it's been suggested that 3 of us serve on this task force for the RFQ. Is there anybody that would like to volunteer to serve on it?
Chairman, I'd like to volunteer.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. I would also. All right. So, Mr. Stevens, would you want to make a motion for Mr. Stevens, Ms. Davis, and Mr. McCoy to serve on the RFQ task force? And you have to press motion. Cassie explained to me. And
Second.
if someone wants to second it, they say second and press the button. Do we have a second?
Yep.
Okay, is there any discussion? All in favor, say aye and press the button. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
No, and press the button. We good, Cassie? And they can abstain. Okay. Mr. Stevens, what?
Aye. Have enough? Okay.
Are we happy? Sweet. Okay, item 3, Timothy's going to lead us discussion and possible action to select 1 to 3 members of the advisory board to join the National Institute of Corrections Planning and New Institutions Program.
And I knew we had a sharp bunch when we got you all and could work through. The fact that you can work through the voting system means the jail design's easy. Mr. Chair, if I can approach and hand these out.
Please, sir. Timothy, maybe one more, please. Do you need one? I can share. Okay. Timothy, would you also send this by email?
Yes, I will.
Thank you, sir.
And I can send it around to all of you all. So going back to the fall, there was the National Institute of Corrections, which is a department of the Department of Justice, has a process called the Planning of New Institutions. And Greg Williams, the current administrator who's about to resign, he had developed a program with them where they were wanting to come and to help this body with that planning process. Because the federal government didn't have a budget, didn't have funding, they had not engaged with us to actually make that happen. Obviously, over the holidays, the federal government finalized their budget process, and Major Garner and I had a call with Mike Jackson at the National Institute of Corrections to do that. And so what this is in front of you is the 3-day training program. They break it up into individual modules. They'd like the participants to be there as much as possible, or for people that have certain expertise to come in and out based on those modules. But they have proposed a date already to come here, which would be April 12th, 13th, and 14th. And they are working on their end to solidify the funding and to get the trainers. But that was the earliest time. And I talked with the county engineer. He's optimistic, especially with the RFQ committee, that we might have a designer and architect in place by that April 12th, 13th, 14th. So they would be part of this 3-day process. And the process is really to look at, what do you want out of the facility? How do you want to make that happen? And so we've done a lot of that legwork through the study that you all have just gone through. And it would include community members, the different county officials that are necessary. Obviously, Major Garner would be involved, her staff, facility staff, and others. They actually have about 24 folks that they want to have in this room, and they have it figured out who they want that to be. But at a minimum, they are willing to have 3 of you designated, up to 3 of you designated. And then as long as we swap people out, others might be able to flow into that conversation if there's a particular module that you are interested in. But they want us to at least pick 3 folks that would be part of this process. So it's up to the pleasure of this board as to whether that's 1, 2, or 3 individuals. But that was the information we got. And then, did you want to add anything, Major Garner, about? No. Yeah. So we talked. So we're anticipating continuing to have conversations with him leading up to April 12th.
I'd like to participate, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Same.
Thank you, Sandino.
As would I.
Thank you. And it works on your 3 guys' calendars?
I just checked, and so far it does.
Great. Would you like to make that as a motion, Mike?
I'd like to move that Javier Nera, Sandino Thompson, and Mike Mize participate in the Pony training program in April.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second? We got a second from whoever presses the button first. Do we have a second, Cassie? Is there any discussion?
Blair.
All in favor, say aye and press a button.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say no. Abstain, press a button. Do we pass, Cassie? Need some help. Happy? Great. Item 4 is a presentation and discussion on county acquisition and procurement process. Timothy, would you start it, please? Or somebody start it. Stacy.
And this is Chantel, our purchasing agent, who said you'd meet. She's the one that keeps us on task with statutes. She'll do a very good job of that for us. But in addition to that, we want these processes to be open and transparent, obviously. And she's going to explain to you a couple of things that are going to be coming up quickly, which is land acquisition, and then maybe be thinking about how you want to procure your contractor.
This morning, again, my name is Chantel Boso. I've been the purchasing director since 2019, but employed in different offices for a little bit longer than that. This morning, the BOCC approved to issue an RFP for proposals regarding potential land sites. The part of the criteria that they determined this morning was 40 to 80 acres. Responses would identify availability to utilities, ingress and egress accessibility, access to major roadways, and then other information including zoning. I think ownership history is important to have that included, and there's a couple other details that will be drafted very quickly in my office to get that out onto the streets. I'm proposing even a media advisory for this particular RFP. The next step, once those proposals come in, the BOCC will open those in a public meeting. I wouldn't anticipate more than 30 days. Looking at our BOCC dates, I could probably recommend a March 6th opening date if that previous discussion talking about bringing in an architect and these April dates, if we need to shorten that a little bit, we can. Also, for this RFP, the Board of County Commissioners may designate this committee to review those land site proposals. And we can talk a little bit further on what that would look like, evaluation, even tours of sites, things like that as they get a little bit closer. When it comes to acquisition processes in general, whenever you're considering the construction, many of you are already aware of maybe what options we have. Your typical design bid build. We do a lot of that with Oklahoma County. Design build is an option. Probably the most recommended is the at-risk construction management method of bringing on a contractor in order for them to correlate with your architectural firm. I'm always available for any questions and conversations as we get closer. That basically covers the gist of it, but if you have questions now, I'd be happy to answer anything.
Questions for Chantel?
I do.
Joanne?
Okay. Can you walk me back through on
ma'am.
the architectural, at least on the land? Let's go with the land acquisition first.
Sure.
How many days do you leave the RFP out?
For real property, we have issued a very few real property RFPs. The most recent one was out for 21 days. So that would be the county standard. And I would recommend that no less than 21 days. Gives plenty of time for publishing, to make phone calls and connections so that people know that it's out there. And then in order to have time to respond as well.
Okay, and I'm probably getting into the weeds.
Okay.
In terms of evaluating that, you have a standard on the RFP. Is that, and that's public, I'm assuming? The
Yes,
RFP will be public.
The RFP will be public. Yes.
Okay, so anyone can go look to see what the requirements are based on what you simply said here.
Yes, ma'am.
And then once you get in, are you, if you get 15 in or 20 in, then what's your time limit for evaluating those proposals?
We want to have that outlined in the RFP, maybe a response time frame or whenever people can expect responses by. That is generally up to this committee or even the Board of County Commissioners if they want to set dates for that. There's nothing set right now.
Okay.
When proposals are received, that has to be received in the Board of County Commissioners public meeting.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll have to meet those scheduled deadlines. For this committee to review those, we'll have to meet your next scheduled meeting or call for a special or something of that nature so that you can get these right away and review them and discuss them. The evaluation criteria will already be set, and that means what information we're requesting. So we're requesting ownership history, we're requesting zoning, we're requesting their current jurisdiction that they're in. The proposals must be within Oklahoma County. What roads do they have access to? So there are certain features that you will have that information to evaluate quickly if it will be a good property to further look into or not.
And once the selection is done, those that are not awarded or not moving on to the next phase based on this, do they have a time frame in which they can come back and say we got a problem?
Well, try not to get too much in the weeds, but
I'm sorry.
your long straw in this is going to be the zoning, because there's only very few zoning categories that a facility like this can be in to begin with. And no matter what zoning category this piece of land comes with, even if it's industrial, it's a special use permit inside that zoning. So there will be public notice and there will be public hearings on the piece of land that you select. And depending on how those hearings go, because you can ill afford to get into a big zoning battle, that piece of land may have to be discarded and bring the second one in, and bring the third one in. So you're going to have to prioritize. You know, if we get 15 parcels of land in, you want to number them 1 to 15. And it's going to be an interesting process, is all I'll say.
Okay, thank you. And I'll talk to you more later.
Yes, ma'am.
Other questions from the board?
Do you have any idea, just a rough feel for how many RFPs we might get? I know that's kind of a hard question, but you may have some feel for that.
No,
Okay.
I have no idea. I expect a large return of proposals.
Thank
A lot of times we may see proposals that may not even come close to the requirements, but just to make sure they get their hat thrown in there, we'll see a lot. We'll see a little bit of that.
Chantel, do governments respond to RFPs, or would we have to go solicit if the land's owned by the government?
There is no restriction for any entity to respond. We certainly have other. Were you wanting to speak? We certainly have other provisions in order to have land transactions with government entities. So those can be outside of the bidding process, or if they put in a proposal for land, that can be considered just as any other. The state of Oklahoma or airport land or whatever it may be, if there's land out there that they want proposed, they can give us a call and present that to us.
Thank you.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, we would add that to the list of the RFPs that come in, if it
Okay.
comes from a source like that.
So Chantel, you're working on two solicitations then, the RFQ for a consultant and the acquisition of the land? Doing two then?
Currently, the land is being drafted today.
Okay.
Your RFQ for architectural services may need to consider what type of construction method you're doing. And that may be because design build it would be different on what kind of services you're providing and how you're identifying what those services will be.
So who can answer your question so you can start tomorrow?
I suppose it's this committee.
Let's turn to Stacy for that answer. Because that's a good question. You need a fact before you can do an
That is
RFQ, and we gotta
very-
have people here in April and all this stuff.
That's a very good question, because if we go design, bid, build, or CM at risk, the architect's gonna work for us. So we're gonna get one either way. If you would propose design, build, the architect actually works for the contractor. So we wouldn't even really need to go through that process. But you need to think long and hard about what the best process is for this project and how you want to go forward. And I don't know what mechanism you want to do to talk amongst yourselves and make that decision. But even if you eliminate one, that would be helpful to Chantel to know how to go forward.
Right. And for us, our challenge is they need the answer tomorrow to get the people here in April. So how do we offer advice?
If I may, I think design build is a great process. I don't think it's one that fits for this particular solution. I think we need to have the county have as much control over the design as possible, which leads me to a construction management at risk or a design bid build with a preference to construction management at risk.
And if that's the consensus, that helps her get her work.
I had similar perspectives, but I'm happy that I got Javier's infinite wisdom
Okay.
first.
And Joanne's familiar with procurement. Do you have any advice here?
The only thing is that my concern is how defined in those two areas that you talked about, how defined does your requirement have to be in order to get what you want? That's, how defined do we have to tell the architect how defined? That's all I need to know. How defined does that requirement have to be?
Yeah, so it seems like the sort of path we're on right now, we actually focus on the design. You have the opportunity to advertise and identify the right kind of construction manager at risk. So you start working on some cost controls, but you actually bring them alongside this county-led sort of design process in my mind. So it's really the design process, having a CM, and then being able to advertise something, CM at risk, where somebody's essentially signing up for some parameters. And I think maybe we need to do that. Maybe we can't do that until we get a little bit further down the line with the design process. But you're not losing sort of time because the clock doesn't start on the construction until you got construction documents anyway.
I'm not sure. What do we conclude?
I think my suggestion is that we go with a selection of the architect first, and then a construction management at risk delivery after that. And I think we have enough information about the qualifications that we're seeking for the architectural firm that an RFQ could be issued pretty quickly. And that gives us a little bit of time to identify the best qualified CMs as well.
And Stacy, how does that work within your all's methods?
Say that again.
So my suggestion was that we already know what we're looking for in the way of qualifications for the design firm. So we go ahead and proceed with the RFQ for design firm. And then we follow shortly thereafter with qualifications for construction manager at risk.
Yeah, that works within these statutes. Yes.
Okay, so you like that. Any other comments from the board? Any public comments?
I have used both construction management risk and design bid build. I think you could do either one here. I think the construction manager at risk gives us a lot more flexibility in terms of being able to complete this project in a timely way. I think it may give us more control over, that may give the county more control over the design and the construction processes rather than a pure design bid build process.
Other board comments? I see consultants out there that have an interest in the discussion, whether it's HOK, or Mr. Sempner, or ADG. Do you have any input?
I've been around enough, people have asked me my opinion on this enough. The one discussion I'm not hearing you all have is any sort of owner's rep.
Do we have to worry about that today, Javier?
I don't.
Okay, later. Other comments?
Yeah, presently and in the past, we do all three.
Okay.
Actually, there's 5 that we do, 5 different delivery methods. And in different parts of the country, they do different things, different times. There's different state rules and regulations in different ones, so that kind of influences some things. But whatever method you decide to go with, we're good and easy to go with.
Thank you.
The 2 that you're talking and referring to, we're seeing more of those now.
Thank you, sir. Yeah. And ADG's quiet. Great. So I don't think we can make a motion. It's not on the agenda, but I think to answer your question, Chantel, I think what you're hearing, the consensus from this board is hire an architect and then do CM at risk. Is that right, Javier? And everyone?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Does that take care of you?
Does, I'll get those turned around as quickly as I can.
So you can go do your RFQ for an architect now.
That's right.
Super. Other thoughts on this topic? Chantel, anything else from us? Okay, great. I think we're done with number 4. Yes? No, we're not, Timothy. Come on back.
So the county clerk has established the 4th Tuesday. No, you can go to number 5. I'm sorry.
And I think maybe under 4 was the bond council going
Oh,
to say
we-
something?
Oh, okay.
Just everything is dovetailing so nicely in our discussion.
Remind me of your name.
My name is Jared Davidson. I'm with Public Finance Law Group here in Oklahoma City. John Michael Williams and I, Williams, Box, Forshey, and Bullard, are co-bond counsel to the county and its various public trusts. And so kind of to dovetail with all of this regarding the $260 million gold bond issue. On February 6th, you'll see a notice setting the sale date for the initial tranche of those bonds, which right now is estimated to be about $45 million. So that can be used as part of your process regarding site acquisition, retaining consultants, and getting that design process started as a part of that. We anticipate an additional 2 to 3 issuances, just depending on how the project progresses and the timeline. Just like the ARPA funds, we're mindful of the federal tax and securities law requirements that are necessary to issue publicly offered tax-exempt debt, and we want to avail ourselves to the utmost capacity to do that. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have, but just wanted more than anything to know that process is being initiated, and we would expect to have that initial tranche of funds in the bank probably about mid-May.
Thank you. Questions from the board? Any questions from the public on agenda item number 4? We're done there. What's next, Timothy? 5 comes after 4.
So, as the county clerk has reserved this space the fourth Tuesday afternoon of the month at 1:30 p.m. So these are all special meetings because you all started after the deadline to get the dates to the Secretary of State. However, because they're specials, you could also meet before February 28th for your next meeting should the need arise related to the RFQ process or the acquisition process. So those are the fourth Tuesday of the month is where you all should pencil that in for the rest of the year. And then as the need arises, there could have the opportunity for you all to come back related to specific items. Potentially later on in the construction design where you all will be making some decisions on various items. The funds can only be expended by the Board of County Commissioners. So we'll need to have you all meet soon enough and quickly enough to give them time to put it on their agenda to do their due diligence to actually expend funds. But at least for the next one, February 28th, at least, if not sooner.
Thank you, sir. Questions for Timothy? I have a question going backwards to Chantel. Will this RFQ committee that we just created see this RFQ for the architect before it goes out?
Yes.
Great. Okay, what else, folks? All right,
I have a
thanks.
question. Well,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Chantel. In terms of your procurement processes, are all of those out there? And, you know, I can look it up in terms of the,
Yes, we have a lot of processes on our website.
okay.
A lot of reference to the statutes. We just kind of follow it to the book.
Okay.
And I'd be more than happy to discuss that.
Okay,
with
and the
you anytime.
evaluation processes too, are those normal? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Chantel may have some, you might have a quick conversation with Joanne, maybe with some more detail.
Absolutely.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
If anything else today, friends? Timothy, can we leave? Okay, see you in February.
Move to adjourn.
I have a motion, press the motion button. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye and press
Aye.
the button. Opposed, press no. Abstain, press a button. Thank you, Cassie.